actually apply to presidential elections? Because if you believe that, it's true. Before my extensive research into Cal Poly's databases, I wasn't really sure how it all worked, but now I have a much greater understanding of how we elect our presidents. The United States uses a system called the Electoral College to elect its presidents. Social Education published an article, Electoral College, in 2008, explaining that the Electoral College, during non-election cycles, can be a really boring topic to talk about, but that students should be engaged because when students realize how important the Electoral College might be to the chances that their preferred presidential candidate gets elected in the next election. The Electoral College is a formal presidential vote. Each state gets its votes based on how many senators and House of Representatives in the House of Representatives that it has. Each state appoints electors to then take those votes and apply them during the Electoral College to put those votes towards their presidential choice. Teaching about the Electoral College, in an article Dulio wrote, published by the National Council of Social Studies, claims that students don't actually know that when they go to vote, when they mark that candidate's name down, they're not actually voting for that candidate, but instead they're voting to tell their representative how they would like them to vote. So today, I'm going to talk about how you should be an informed citizen about the history of problems with the Electoral College, as well as the harm it has done, and what we as citizens can do about it. So let's jump right in. The Electoral College was created in 1787 in the writing of the Constitution. And since then, Politics and Policy Journal published Attitudes Towards Electoral College Reform in 2009, stating that there had been a total of 6 disputed elections. 1800, 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, and most recently 2016. Now, most of these are due because one candidate wins the national popular vote, which is the tallied votes on the actual ballots themselves, and the other person wins the Electoral College, which is how the electors vote each state's electoral votes. But one in particular was due to an unforeseen turn of events, 1876. Prospects for the Electoral College after election of 2000, written by Jennifer Turan Rothwell in 2001, points out that in 1876, the presidential vote was tampered with on both sides of the aisle. There were believed that both the Republicans and the Democrats were stuffing the ballot. It means adding more ballots for rather than one person, one vote, it was 2 votes per one person. And the Republicans were also accused of placing Democratic ballots with Republican ones to confuse illiterate voters. So a committee of 15 people, 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans, and 1 unaffiliated political member, were brought together to judge the validity of the election. Well, at the last second, the unaffiliated member left this committee so that it could join a higher portion of the court system, leaving its spot to be taken by a Republican representative. For obvious reasons, the Republican candidate won the election, but the judgment favored in rule of the Republican candidate and had to be pushed to the Republican-controlled Senate and the Democratic House for ratification. Now, the Republican candidate convinced the Democratic House to elect him as president, and in doing so, he would agree to pull troops from the South and stop reconstruction and integration of people of color into their communities, when slavery had just ended a decade before. Sure, this is an old example, but voter fraud and things like it come into question each voting cycle, with funding from large corporations and super PACs, to possibility of other countries trying to influence our votes. But enough about political corruption within the electoral system for president. Let's transition now and talk a little bit about the harm that the Electoral College has caused. Benjamin Bollinger wrote an article, Point, Abolish the Electoral College, for International Social Science Review in 2007, where he points out that California had 615,000 people per 1 representative vote, whereas smaller states like Wyoming have 165 people per 1 representative vote. That's almost a 4-to-1 ratio. So the idea of 1 person, 1 vote under democracy no longer stands for a presidential election, the highest held elected official in the United States. States with smaller populations generally have a better ratio for representation. Duquette wrote an article in 2017 for the Atlantic Economic Journal that said that in 2012 and 2013, the outcomes in both states, New York and California, were both treated as almost foregone conclusions before the election even started. That's because both of these states statistically vote the same way for every election cycle for at least the past 10 years. So the candidates, those states receive hardly any attention from the candidates other than for fundraising reasons. These states are considered locked in and have voted the same way for many election cycles, California included. These states are often overlooked in the campaign trail because the candidates know they have either won or lost these states before they even start. So why waste their money and time? We need a new system that includes every vote and leaves no state ignored, because the candidate already knows whether they've won or lost these states. Blue states for Democrats, red states for Republicans, and gray states for the swing states, which is where these candidates spend most of their time. Not only does the Electoral College ignore states, but the original basis for this system is no longer true. The Committee of 11, who drafted the Constitution, wanted to do a direct popular vote, which means one person, one vote. They decided against it and went with the Electoral College because they believed that the direct popular vote, that the US didn't have the infrastructure for international communication so that everyone could make informed decisions. The founders also feared that their fellow Americans would not be intelligent enough to make reasonable and informed decisions on the highest held elected office in the United States. But since then, California has become the United States has become much more intelligent, and the ability to communicate internationally has become very easy. We have TV providers in every state. We have internet in almost every home, and we have a cell phone in almost every pocket. Now I'm going to shift gears and talk about what we can do. Now, for obvious reasons, we can't just go making amendments to the Constitution and change the outdated Electoral College. But what we can do, and what I implore you to do, is to register to vote and be an informed citizen so that we can make small incremental changes that will lead to larger, long-term changes in government. We can have a say on who we put in our local Chamber of Commerce, or even our local courtrooms. Who knows? On our next ballot, there could be an initiative to change the Electoral College that Robert Ritchie and Andrea Levin proposed in their article proposed in the Presidential Studies Quarterly, such as eliminating the Electoral College altogether and moving to a direct popular vote. Or even keeping the Electoral College, but adding 2 votes for every state, depending on whoever wins the national popular vote, that candidate would win all 105 electoral votes. Or keeping the Electoral College and changing the system in which the points are awarded so that each state systematically gives its points based on the ratio of that state's national popular vote. To wrap it all up, there's only one thing that I want you to take away from this, and that is to register yourself to vote so that we can make a difference when the time comes. It will give our representatives a better idea of what our generation's views on policies are and what we want to see in government. And we can impact local areas such as the Chamber of Commerce, and even local judges, or even maybe state governors. Soon, the United States will be our United States. Maybe our next ballot will reform the Electoral College that could benefit millions of votes who don't necessarily make an impact now. But we need to be deciding factor behind that, and the only way to do that is to vote. So go register and be an involved and an informed Californian. Yeah, we were. It's okay. I forgot to tell you.